You don't need to see all that. All my 600 open tabs. All right. So let's post that on the attendance stuff. And we were working on unit tests, chat about a couple things. I was thinking about this hosting and still kind of undecided where we're going to host the front end portion of it as well as the back end portion with the MySQL. Heroku may be the best route on that. I don't know at this point. But our database, I'm wondering if we can do like a separate hosting. We do something like an AWS. You know, those are easy enough to spin up and set up the auth so things connect up and that kind of thing. Yeah, there are a couple of options for just hosting a database. Just some things to think about. I don't know. You know, moving forward, we'll figure that out. You know, probably outside of the MVP, what we're doing here, right? Dylan, saw you picked up the auth wire up. Cool. Interested to see what comes out of there. We're gonna have to look at how to unit test the node side of it too. You know, that'd probably be a good one for us to see, right? So we left off last time. I don't have all the files open. I just reran the unit tests where we had pretty much finished. I think Katie described it as the whack-a-mole portion, right? Getting rid of all those goofy little error messages. And we had hit that kind of point where we had solved a lot of these little blue ones coming up, and all the ones left were in the login modal. So we can clear up, I would think, pretty quickly the login modal because we should have that same pattern in the register modal tests. So we'll open that up here. I'll clear this here in a second. Open this up to the side so we can see these side by side. And let's see, let's just get that way down there. Doesn't matter how much we see. Okay, so a lot of these are going to be nearly identical, would be my guess. You know, so we've got the code picture, the test bed. We have the map dialog. We don't have the forms module, so let's put that over here. The map form fields, map input, and the browser animation seem like ones we'd want to bring over. And there's probably going to be an order problem since we have the header API service over here too. But we can fix that, right? If it will let me. There we go. There's just an order problem there. We have a mock dialog ref and a mock header API service in login, which we don't need over here. That's okay. And then the register modal and the login modal, those are the two pieces that have to have, right? Components and fixtures, imports. So way more imports over here. We have the map dialog. So let's copy that. And yeah, it's gonna want that cleaned up. That's fine. And then we need these two as well. And then our declaration should be the same, but then our providers, we have the map dialog ref and the header. So we should be okay there because this is the one that's working and this is the one we need to fix. So those should be okay. And now we have fixtures and components and all of that should be pretty straightforward. So let's rerun this and see what happens. Everybody doing okay so far?
Sure.
Cool.
Yep.
19 success and no weird little messages in between. Awesome. I like that. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a quick peek at what we have set up. And let's see, the images are at the root. We'll look at our package JSON and take a peek at what we have. So we only have the NG test. What I want is to have a generator report. Okay. And you would see something up here if we had the report actually in here. So we need to look up what we add in for that. So And the reporter stuff's pretty easy. Code coverage output, so outputs a code coverage report. Okay, let's see if it does anything. Okay. So it's false by default. And I don't know what's wired up by default. So we're going to see. Did I copy that? Did not copy that. Well, that would be a bad one to paste in with it. Probably should just hit the enter key, but let's see. Dash code coverage. Here we go. I would have put recorder, so that's wrong. Copy. Let's run it, see what it does. Worst case, it's going to come up and say, hey, you don't have anything to do this. We're going to find out. They keep upgrading things. So from one version to the next, sometimes you have to add things in, sometimes you take things out. I'm hoping this is just a really easy run the tests and we get something comes out. Okay, so it reported a coverage to the command line. That was interesting. And the four important ones really are statements, branches, functions, and lines. Although this is kind of a rough way to look at it, because how do I know what's what, right? And let's pull that down a little bit. And actually, I don't need to pull it down because we need to open this up. And you'll see in here there's an index HTML. And here's the fun part, because we're going to use our live server. And the live server should be at port 5500. Okay. And this is cool because now we know app is covered, core services are covered, features are covered. Some of the features are, most of the features are covered. Headers not, home not, login and register have some gaps, right? We don't have our pipeline set up to block if we're at a certain percentage or not. What happens in a lot of employment locations is your statements has to be above 80, 70 or 80%. They don't typically look at branches or functions or lines. The nice part about the Angular testing and the reporting is it doesn't count in things that you don't need. So some of the problems we used to have is we have a karma.conf JavaScript file that used to get counted in. And you have, all these basic pieces that are part of the application, but not really a part of the application. So if I look here in the source, we have the test TS that would get counted in, polyfill, the main. As you come down into the app down here, the app module got counted in. Well, how do you rate unit tests against the app module? It's just doing imports and exports, right? I mean, app routing would get counted in. That's just your router. The functionality that's in there is inherent in Angular. So that kind of testing became kind of annoying. And in the most recent ones, they're now discounting those out. So you can see here, we look at app, you can click down, you can drill into here. We can see that this app component was hit one time somewhere along the way. There's no explicit test needed because really all we have is the title. Okay. If we come back up and we go down into our core services, we have the API handler service. This is our abstract. Okay, and it tells us every time how many times we hit that function, how many times we hit that line. We actually hit this one more than this one. Okay, makes sense. No big deal there. Now here as we get into assistance, this is a component. And there are two ways of testing. Angular and React tend to have different thought processes on it. And I'm actually okay with either one. Okay. Catalan and I talked previously about a test that he had generated that actually was doing a component level test. It was clicking a button or checking that a button existed, right? There was right content on a particular button, which is not a bad way to test. And certainly can be done here, but that's more of how React tests. React assumes, hey, you've got this component, let's test that component in the DOM. Angular is more like, hey, I've got this module within a class. Let's test that to make sure that's working right. Honestly, there's lots of argument and debate over this. This is, in my mind, is very similar to the arguments over spaces versus tabs and semicolons versus no semicolons. And what you need is you need coverage of your code. And whether you're clicking on that button or interacting with that component to see that the right state gets updated based on how you set things up and initialize that component, whether you test it in the DOM or you test that your modules within that component do what you expect, that's the important part. You're checking expectations. Our expectation is select grade level, we'll take a key and assign it to this variable. This is not exactly a complicated one to test. It does one thing, and it does one thing very, very well, right? If we look at our next one down, let's go all files, come back down to grade level selection. It's probably not much more complicated, okay? All right, good. Let's take a look at header. Header probably has a little more functionality. We have an API service. So now in here, we can see we have a send login that really never got hit. Nothing in here happened. It was send logout that nothing really happened. This can't be component level tested. This is a service, right? If we come back and we look at the header component, yes, I could check that header component. I could click the login. I could click the logout. I could register, see that the modal's open and that kind of thing. I could just as easily come in here and test the trigger function to see that it opens a modal and it sets up the after close. Okay. I can test what happens when it completes. That's a lot harder to do than testing it at the component level. Okay. And in my mind, in some ways, this is a little more accurate. It's 6 1 half does the other. Now, generally, I'm building unit tests on the expectation that there's some level of integration tests, some level of automated tests, some level of manual tests up above that. So the components get tested. Okay. With Angular, they tend to lean towards the module level within the classes. I mean, it's all class-based. Okay. So the coverage also gives us one other thing, which is, where do I still need to work? This is all code that I need to get up to date before I can push up, right? So we look at the header, and I can see in that API service that we got a whole lot in that API service to test. So we've gotten to the point where this is the point where I consider we're not failing. It doesn't mean we have enough coverage, okay? So let's come in here, and the one we saw in there that we needed was the header API service. Okay, so we got the API service test suite, and we'll open the actual API service on the other side, and let's see what we need to do. Well, we have a constructor. I'm not going to worry about that. We have a send login that we need to test positive and negative. Okay, so it expects send login to successfully send username and password. And what are we doing? We are assigning the logged in user and returning the response success. Okay, so we're returning something. I don't remember what the response success is, but we're going to define it. Okay. And return success. Until I've done this, if we've done. So we need to do a couple things. Looking at this, the first thing we need to do is we need to spy on and mock the service. You get URL. Return value. Because I really don't want to just defining anything. I'm going to say, hey, I want it to be URL. So we can define any kind of setup we want for later on. All right. It doesn't matter what we pass it, key, window, that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter. We're going to define what return value is, so it gets assigned here, and that has something to do with what happens over here. And we also know we need a username and password. And this is actually how I normally do it. It doesn't really matter what they are. Now, I think one of the things I didn't point out was over here, I'm referencing everything that's on this component is this, right? So this.http, where HTTP was brought in the constructor. Over here, we reference it as service or component if you're testing a component. That's because of how we've set this up to take the actual typed header API service. We inject the test bed header API service onto service. Okay, this is a typical setup. So even if you're testing React, somewhere along the way, you're going to want to attach that component to a variable so that you can reuse it throughout the test. Okay. What's happening here is it runs the test and it overwrites service with a clean copy every single time. Okay. That's why we have that before each, because that runs before each test. Okay. Let's see. I'm not worried about the console log. We probably could comment those out at the moment, but we need to handle this first value from in this HTTP. So what's happening here is HTTP returns an observable. So if we look at this from and of, this returns an observable, and of returns an observable. So we have two different ways we can do it, and it's pretty straightforward stuff. And I'm honestly, I can't remember exactly which one I did on the post and the gets. I do a little bit differently, but let's do this then. We want to spy on service dot HTTP. And what you need in the string is the last one on any function that you're setting up. So in this case, it's going to be post. Okay. And why is it complaining about that? It's private. Okay, so when it's private, you have to use a square bracket string notation that bypasses the private. We want to return value. Oh, and return value. And I do believe of will work here. And we want to return something that'll go into first value, go through the await, come back to the response. Okay. We need something in there that has success. Right. So it's going to be something like this. Not have to be any more complicated. Now, I will say the other thing you have to catch is we have an await here. So we have to make our test async. So when we fire, we can await. If you don't await, here really weird stuff happens. Okay. So the next thing that happens in our line, it'll go through that first. That'll get created, sent back. Doesn't matter what the URL and data looks like. Response comes and gets this value success true. Username gets set, and it should return response success, which is true. Should. We'll find out. This next up, that's our assert, or sorry, that's our setup. Then we'll act, and then we'll assert. Okay, so our act will be something like constant result any equals service send login username password. The only trick is we need to do an await right here. So it has to wait for the send login to finish. The send login's async, right? So then we should be able to check. So we should be able to say expect service dot logged in user to equal username. Google bracket username. And if we really wanted to get fancy, we would do something like service dot logged in user, just to verify that there's nothing in it before we fire. That way, after we fire, we can see it's changed. Then we should also expect result to equal success, right? Should look like that. Except that's wrong because we're returning response at success. So it should equal true. That sound right? But this is either going to work or it's going to bomb really badly. This is the fun part. Let's run it, see what happens. Okay. And if it bombs badly, we'll tweak it, we'll figure out why, we'll fix it. And this should allow us to test half of that function. And we'll see that when we go look at the, hey, it passed. All right, so since it passed, I'm going to rerun the code coverage. And if we run it with code coverage instead of the regular test, then this will update automatically each time. There we go, we got coverage. Our numbers should have changed, 62, 28, 57, 68, 28, 60. So they've gone up a little bit. And if we come over here, notice that whole try block has been covered. Okay. The catch block is a little bit trickier to handle. Not much. And I'll usually write this one just as handle failure. Username password's good. User login's okay. Yet URL doesn't change. But here on the post, what we're going to do is we're going to say from, and we're going to send it a new error message, I think. And that's just layout problems there. Okay, good. What's the problem here? Error is not, this is an of maybe. There we go. Maybe we only need the of. Not gonna worry about that. So what happens now? Well, result still works. The await still works. It's going through. What actually happens is the HTTP post fires. This is where an error is thrown by the observable. That kicks us into this block, passing the error that we pass in. So we should see the console log, which we actually are spying on the console log. We don't have to worry about that right now, but what we should get is we should return false. Logged in user should stay the same. It should not be changed because we never got to this line. Okay. So we'll take this out and change that to false. And that should be what our result is. Let's run it and find out. And the cool part is watching your numbers climb as you do this. I always like that part. Oh, we broke it. Okay. So we didn't watch the numbers climb that time. We broke it. Expected object to not have proper's username. So something happened here. It didn't handle failure correctly. So where it errored was here. It's saying that that is set to username. We know we set it. We zeroed it out at the beginning. So let's see. Let's try some. Trigger is there. There it is. Throw error. Try that. And like I said, this is one I do a lot, but I haven't done it in a while. So got an extra squiggle, I think, in there somewhere. There, let's try it that way. I knew there was something off in what I was doing there. And we still might need to wrap that in the over from, but apparently not. It worked exactly the way we expected. You see how we kind of followed that flow and said, oh, what do we want to do at this point and this point and this point? Does this make sense?
I have one question. Well, a
Sure.
few questions, I guess.
Please.
So you said the of kind of of is used for the observables. Is that right?
Yes. So what it does is it takes what's inside it and wraps it in an observable. So what we're doing is we're returning an observable of success true.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the whole return becomes an observable. HTTP post expects an observable. This first value from pulls this out of the observable. So because HTTP post normally returns an observable, our test has to do something with the observable.
Okay.
Okay. So we make it into an observable that we can use. I've done deep dives on RxJS, and there's all kinds of stuff on the of and the from. These are ways to quickly spin up an observable, which is a perfect use case for what we call dummy data for unit tests. Okay.
Dummy data. That's
Yeah.
just like,
Well, this whole thing becomes an observable with data. It's what we call dummy data. It's not the actual data coming back from an HTTP post. It did not go to our backend because our backend's not even running.
yeah, gotcha.
Okay. Anything else?
The HTTP is in brackets. Is that because it's a variable in the class?
The variable, well, no.
Okay.
The variable in the class is private. Okay. If that were public, we could have done .http. Okay. One of the things I learned somewhere along the way, and this is a weird one that just kind of jumped out at me. I was setting up some tests for a talk, and I found that the square bracket string notation allowed me to bypass private in a TypeScript class. Okay, so what we have here in the private, this is a part of class JavaScript, but it's really using TypeScript as its outer wrapper. So the TypeScript is what normally would let us use the .http. I found this loophole that let us access private variables or modules within a class. And when I hadn't dug into it, I hadn't figured out why. I figured this out like an hour, 2 hours before I gave this talk. While I was in the talk, while I was explaining this really weird thing I found, somebody tracked down, there's this whole big long thread conversation in the TypeScript community on why they allow the square bracket notation. And it comes down to, very simply, I need to be able to access the privates for unit test.
Okay, yeah, so it's exactly made for this.
It's exactly made for this. It's a backdoor intentionally left in for unit testing. You
Seems like
don't
kind of a
want,
hack, but
it is a hack. And it's one that you have to be very, very careful of, because you don't want to use that in your regular functionality. You don't want end users, who might be other developers, using your components and your services to bypass to make their code work. I've actually run into that, with clients where somebody junior or mid will be like, "Oh, I can fix this by doing this." Well, no. If we actually needed to access HTTP from somewhere else, we'd want to expose it in some way. Either A, make it public, or B, have like a GET reference that would allow us to access it. But keep that functionality that needs to be private. Okay. So yeah, it's just a bypass. Now, but what you can see now is we've got this send login done. How much harder do you think send logouts can be? It doesn't even return anything. It just either passes or fails, right? In fact, we really don't have anything to catch here. Now, I will say that we are currently spying on console. It's exposed through the shared spec tools that we set up, that helper. So we can use this console log here since we're already spying on it and we're stubbing it, we can use that. That variable should be accessible. We could check to see what it got. So we should be able to, and let's use this one as the example. So our expect console log. It's not let me do that. Let's just since it's spied on that way, we might be able to reference it this way. This might break things a little bit, but it should still give us the message. The error sometimes gets wrapped in other stuff. If it didn't wrap it, things come back really nice. If it did wrap it, we're going to get this ugly error thing, but it'll at least show that it tried to do it. So we failed expect spy on log to equal error message. What? Expected spy. Well, that's weird. So we had it spied on. We should have referenced it. Oh, let's see. I've done this before, and it wasn't by doing this. Because we're already doing that. And what it sounds like it's saying there is it's saying we're expecting it to equal error message. And it didn't, but it didn't tell me what it does equal, which it usually does. Yeah, see, it's already been spied on, so we don't need to do this. Oh, not to equal. Who have been called with. Here we go. It was called with something, right? We need to see what it was called with, not what it equals. It's a function. It's a spy. Well, a spy is not going to equal the string error message, right? It was called with error message. Let's get the right. There we go. So it's close, but actual calls were error : error message. That's a weird call. So what I would do to fix that is I would say something like this: const error NA equals, and let's do this. Remember, I told you sometimes you get weird stuff out of it. Well, let's fix that. And to be called with error. So if we leave that console log in, then this test is fine. There we go. Nice and pretty. So it was called with that error. Cool. So now you can see we could test this on both sides too, because we can see what that is. We can see what happened to logged in user. We'd have to assign it to somebody. And we have 30 minutes. We could probably run through those tests and might have a little bit of time for one or two others. So let's, in my mind, I'm just going to duplicate this. And then this is now send log out. And it's not going to send username and password. It's just going to send an empty string. So, to successfully, and we don't have to return success. We just have to log out. Right? We're not sending username or password. The logged in user, we need to make sure we're logged in. And this is going to be based on what we did up here, username, right? Get URL still needs to fire. The post will want to fire and send a success true. And then when we fire it, we still want to await, but we don't need to get the results because it doesn't return anything. And we're doing send logout and not passing it anything. And then if that's successful, this the logged in user should now be empty. There's no result sent, so we can clear that out. On the error message side, a lot of similar stuff. We're going to have a logged in user. We need to get the get URL. We need to set up an error. We need to throw an error when a post occurs. We need to get the right call here. And then logged in user should now be logged in user should still be username. Oh, there's a missing single quote. There's the problem. How I did it in one, not in the other, I don't know. But this, since it errored, it should not be logged out. Right? Yep. But it did console log it. It didn't return a result. See how much faster that went now that we know the patterns? Once you get the patterns, it's just like, ooh, just duplicate this and tweak it for my scenario. Sometimes the patterns are a nightmare to figure out that first time. You can spend days on some of them. Look, our numbers are going up. branching and everything, and we can come over here and look, and we can say, ooh, look, all this pretty stuff that's been covered that's not red. Right? Easy. And we can see send registration is going to be pretty easy too. I try and do them in the order of my functions. Just so that if I'm reading through the test, they match the order of the functions that I'm writing. Right? So is user logged in would be the next one. Oh. Return true if user logged in. We're going to need a false state. That's easy enough to mock. We have stuff up above that can have us speed that up. So if they're logged in, you have something like this, right? Here's our setup. Then we say const result boolean equals service dot is user logged in. Expect result to equal true. Now notice I don't use the 2B in Angular Jasmine testing. The 2B is a double equal comparison, and it can have type coercion. It bugs me. In Jest, both 2B and 2 equal are triple equal comparisons. So I tend to use 2 equal on both sides of the house, just so I don't ever make that mistake and get something messed up. Jody, welcome.
Thank you. So I'm late.
That's okay. It happens. That's why we record these, so people can go back. Well, I don't need to paste my code. What I need to paste is the attendance link there, and have people check in so I can track time and that kind of stuff. So later on, somebody comes back and asks, we got it, right? All right, so we need to test the negative case on this one. And we come over here. And if we rerun let's rerun our tests the way it is. I haven't saved the file yet with the second part. It is going to show that we got through this, but it's only showing the positive case. I know that because if it doesn't have an own property, it's going to return false, right? I want to be explicit. I want to have both. I don't just want to have coverage. I have co-workers, and why did that not update? Maybe I didn't have it saved on the positive. Let's see, let's comment that out and save and rerun. I want to verify this. Okay, I want to show you what happens. At a lot of times when developers are going, oh, but all my coverage is there. Yeah, but you didn't explicitly test every bit of code you got in there. I want it explicitly tested. If you don't explicitly test, that's a good place for something to break. Okay. In fact, a great place for something to break. So even though we have full coverage, I still think this negative should be covered. So false. And Judy, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to ask. I go kind of quick, and I do have to end right, in fact, probably a minute or two early tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Because I have a coffee chat right after this, and it's using the same Zoom account.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to run this with the negative test in place, and we shouldn't really see anything different here. We shouldn't see anything different in our branch coverage, function coverage, because it's counting that one line. There's no if in there. There's no ternary in there for it to say, hey, you did one and not the other. So we have to be a little more explicit. So it doesn't change things, except my comfort that this code's doing what I expect it to do. Okay. So the last one we have in this service is the send registration, which is probably closest to the send login since we have a username, password, and email, right? So let's get the send login positive and negatives. We'll come down here. There we go. So send registration is what we're working with. So let's copy that. Put it there. Put it there. Put it there. Yes, we're going to have error messages all over the place, but let's get that basic stuff out of the way. So we need a username, we need a password, and we need an email. Okay, this is not affecting the interesting, we're getting the response back on the registration. We're not doing anything with it. Okay, so we didn't read the response. Actually, now looking at this as we're writing the test, we're not returning anything. We said we didn't want that in registration because the user could register multiple people, right? So we could take that out. We don't even need it. We do need to await. And the console logs will help us with checking the error state, right? So we're sending the registration. We're not affecting the login. We still have to do the get URL matching. And then we set up data and then we're firing the post. So we need the post returning success true. We have to add email. And what's it erroring on? Oh, we have linting turned on, Judy, so that's why sometimes it's going to give me messages when it doesn't look like it should. Okay. So we expect it to, we don't expect to do anything there. We don't expect it to return anything. We do expect it to console log, right? So we want to expect that log to be called with, to have been called with API/register return. Easy enough, right? And we don't need to copy that. So down here, we need the email. And the get URL HTTP is all going to be the same, and the error message throw. We do need to add the email over here. And we need to fix it. And then we did want to check the console log that it was fired with the error, but no return or anything. So this should be enough to test send registration in both states. If you notice, we're kind of ran all over the place here because we haven't done anything with it yet. Fingers crossed, right? And yay, nice, pretty good. Ooh, look, our branch is finally over 80%.
Nice and green.
Oh, 100's even better, but yes, we're getting better. Okay. And since we were doing the coverage, we can come back over here and we can see now 100, 100, 100. Yes. So as we come out of this, 2 layers, doesn't refresh this one. I never understood why that never refreshed. We see 100 on that one. Our component, header component, we had a lot of logic in there. So that's going to have a couple of tweaky little things we have to do. So let's take a look at it. We've got 15 minutes. So what I'm thinking is, let's talk through some of this a little bit, and next time we'll jump in and write those. Make sense? That next time is tomorrow, right? Yeah, I got stuff Thursday, which is why I did tomorrow. Don't usually do that, but that's where we are. All right, so it is logged in. This should be a really easy one to test, right? It's looking at logged in user to see if it has the proper username. We have that actually in the service. So we can probably pull that test straight over to here and test it the same way. Okay. Trigger register. What we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to be spying on that open. And all I really want to check is that it triggered dialog open. I don't need to do any more than that. Do I need to check that the dialog ref after close subscribe fires? Well, that's technically this, whatever's returned by this dialog open. So I'd have to spy on it and return it. But the reality is that's minor, that the subscription is set up. What we really need to test is things like this register complete. If you look at this, we have 3 routes through. We have a result is undefined. So it should bail out and not do anything. We have a result status is false. It should bail out and not do anything. That's when they click on cancel. The undefined is they click outside the modal. Okay. So what we'll probably do is we'll write the first one to fire this API send registration, which means we'll just spy on this .api send registration and stub it. So it doesn't actually call the API service. We have a mocked API service already anyway. So nothing's really going to happen there. But we need to do that in such a way that we're returning a promise, because this is an await. Doesn't have to return any data, just it has to be a promise that can be resolved because that's an await. We have the await around our overall test, and that should be able to get our positive. Our negative states really don't need the async await, but I'll probably leave that in. I'll write that first because writing those afterwards to say, did it not call this, is easier to write after you've done the positive version. Okay. Trigger login, same. I mean, you can see trigger register, trigger login. They're going to be almost identical tests. The trigger logout might be a little different. We have to check the send logout, and then we have to see that it got the right data from the mock API. So we have to set up some mock data that it can grab and plug in there. And then the handle login complete is going to run a lot like the register login complete. This is the trigger handle. The trigger logout probably should go after that in order, because unless we want to put all the triggers together and all the registers together, it's kind of weird having the login and login complete separated by another function. That's probably just me moving too fast. So a little bit of cleanup on that, and you can kind of see how we get the right pieces in place. And then the cleanup comes pretty easy. Questions? I know you got questions. Catalan's looking at me like he's got lots of questions.
I don't even know what to ask at this point. Just trying to wrap my head around TypeScript and Jasmine and unit testing as a whole.
It's a lot.
It's almost too much.
Okay. Did you watch my basic and intermediate unit test stuff on YouTube yet?
Probably not.
Those will help. Okay. They're not the cleanest records I ever did. They're a lot like I do here. I'm all over the place doing stuff. But I did walk through, like, what is a mock? What is a spy? What is a stub? What is a dummy variable? Well, let's start at the bottom. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes. So a dummy variable. What do you think it is? Well, these look like dummy variables to me. I have to have something to pass in to send login. I don't really care what it is because I'm mocking and stubbing enough of the remainder of it out. Let's flip send login over here so you can match that. Okay, I have to send these in. I can't call that function without sending something. I could care less that it uses it here and then it passes it in here. I mean, I could check that to see that the post contained that. In my mind, I don't really need to. It's just passing data through. So in that case, I'm setting up dummy data. Okay. Again, I'm setting up a dummy state. So here I need to make sure if I'm sending a login and I'm handling success or failure, I want to set the login user up in a way that we know they're not logged in. Remember, we had data in there, usernames in there if they're logged in. If it's not in there, if they're not logged in. Right? Easy one to check. So just set up stuff there. Ought to be pretty clear that that's a spy. Now, one that I will point out is the definition of spy and stub, spy and mock can get a little fuzzy. Okay. I'm spying on get URL. The return value is turning it into a mock. Okay. I'm not changing the original functionality of get URL in any way, shape, or form. I'm replacing it temporarily. In the purest definition, that's a mock. Angular has no formal mocking capability. Just, I could say, I could import the a class, and I can mock that class, and everything in it's been replaced with stubs of some sort. Okay, so that return value turns it into a mock, even though I'm spying. So I'm actually doing both. Okay, I create an error so that I can throw an error. So I'm spying on it, and again, I'm turning it into a mock because what I want to do is I want to mock what happens when HTTP post gets an error thrown. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm triggering. Now I have to be careful of the async await a little bit. not too horrible. I mean, if it's radically not doing what you expect and you think it is doing it right, go see if it's async await first. Okay. Usually when I screw them up, that's what I screw up. I'm putting the any here. I can actually probably say error if I wanted to. In the case of the send login, I'm getting an object back that has a definition of success and a Boolean, right? So I could probably define that. But man, that's a lot of work to get rid of an underline. Now I got all kinds of other underlines popping up because of that. Boolean's not assignable to, so it's telling me that send login. Oh, we actually return Boolean up here, so that would actually be Boolean. And then this can be Boolean up here. So yeah, so you can clean some of these up and be a little more accurate. Sometimes any in a test, I mean, you got enough other complicated stuff going on in the test. Sometimes it's easier just to kind of ignore that a little bit. Okay, and the reality is, in this case, I'm throwing an error anyway, so nothing's getting to result. Well, actually, technically it is because I'm returning here, but you know, there's you're waiting and balancing. Do I have to check it or not? There's several different thinkings on this, especially with TypeScript. Okay. Do we want to define every piece of data? Yes and no. I like to define a lot, but when it comes to sending data back and forth, like things like the response coming back from the back end, I don't want to define that if I can avoid it. Main reason being, it's going to change over time. I've seen it change enough times that then you're chasing your tail with TypeScript. When it's easier to say any, you're having these conversations with backends. It could change 4 or 5 times before it ever goes to production. And chasing your tail to get that defined properly, you know, when the application gets to be super stable, it's been running for a year, and you're chasing bugs. Go fix those. Backend's not going to change much at that point. Okay. There are arguments against that. You know, I'm rarely paid to write perfect code. Okay, I have this discussion with management a lot because we as developers want to write good code. But there's that golden layer of code where I've got everything nice and tweaked and perfect and lots of good tests and this stuff. That takes time. And time is money. And when you get deadlines, good, solid code is better than the golden. Good code that can be tweaked and adjusted quickly is infinitely better than a perfect final result, because a perfect final is only going to last as long as that version of Angular is still out there and compatible. Okay. So yeah, if I need to slow down with the TypeScript stuff, let me know. Okay. If we need to spend some more time on the TypeScript side of it, we can do that. Realize you can take any of this and you can plug it into that TypeScript playground that we looked at the other day and see what it looks like in JavaScript. You know, there's a conversation that's been coming up. I've seen it on Twitter a couple of times. Different libraries that are shifting back to JavaScript. Have you seen that one? Pay attention, because they're not shifting back to JavaScript because TypeScript's bad. They're shifting back to JavaScript because TypeScript, when you use TypeScript, it defines what the JavaScript looks like. So speed and optimization control goes out the window. You have no control over that. If you're writing pure JavaScript, you have full control over that. The drawback is data errors can propagate fairly quickly if you're not careful. Most of the folks that are writing those larger libraries that need that kind of adjustment for optimization tend to have sharper crews that's okay to do that with. Does that make sense? So I like to have it in because the if I'm doing it myself, I don't want to trust myself on everything. I like having the TypeScript as a backup. Hey, we've never heard of this variable before. Hey, you're trying to pass in this object that should have username and password and it don't have password in it yet. Okay, tell me what I need to have here. And then I know I'm passing the right data, right?